So grateful to have Sarah Ponder and Sam here to help us with this Esther service. This was really a dream that Stephen and I had for a couple of years. As he mentioned, this was canceled because of COVID. The book of Esther is a really inspiring one because it is about a heroine who decides to risk everything by standing up and saying, "Don't harm my people." And so I've always wanted to preach this service on Esther, and I am going to get to Esther. But I'm not going to start with Esther. Instead, I'm going to start with Doris Fish. In the article, "You Just Don't Silence a Drag Queen," Craig Seligman wrote this article for Time magazine, and it's based on his recent cultural history of the early drag scene, focusing on one of its most influential and popular performers, Doris Fish. Now, Doris was the reigning queen in San Francisco in the 1980s, and in many ways, she became its spokesperson. Doris was popular enough that she was flown to Pittsburgh for the daytime talk show Pittsburgh Today. And she didn't disappoint. She walked onto that stage in a red fringed halter top, purple skirt, cobalt blue opera-length gloves, gold platforms, and grapefruit-sized earrings, and a teased blonde wig, as one does. And the host, John Burnett, was a bit agog himself with this. He was a bit taken aback. But after a bit of sparring back and forth with Doris, he realized how funny, honest, and self-confident she was, and it was clear that he was won over by her. Now, as a gay kid in the 1990s, I wasn't so sure about the drag scene. And it wasn't because I didn't think it was funny or entertaining, but I worried, as did a lot of the rest of the queer community at that time, and some that still do, that it alienated mainstream America by putting queerness front and center, and therefore slowed the progress of LGBTQ rights. Today, we would call this respectability politics. It's the idea that if we just blend in, then we will be accepted. Now, in the 1980s, there were really no models for queerness and how it should show up on the cultural scene, because however people did it, they were greeted with hatred and bigotry. When the first gay character was introduced on the TV show Dynasty in 1981, it was heralded as the end of Western civilization. And this was in spite of the fact that the character was played as relatively straightforward and respectable. But a lot of queer people thought that respectability was the way to go. People like Harvey Milk, who were hoping to gain their place at the table wearing suits and ties. Of course, Harvey Milk was murdered in a suit and tie. It didn't seem to do him all that much good. And so that's part of why Doris Fish and the rest of the drag community said, "To hell with that." Their view was that respectability politics weren't going to save anybody. If people hate you, they will hate you whether you wear a tie or a wig. So you might as well be joyfully, exuberantly yourself. And by being out there, defiantly, expressively, exuberantly yourself, you show other people that they too can be defiantly, expressively, exuberantly themselves, whatever that looks like. Now, Doris did see her act as a political one, an intervention into the stultifying conformity of the Reagan era. When that talk show host asked Doris about the kind of example that she was setting for children, Doris said, "Oh yes, I like to think that I have set a positive example to let children know that if they want to be drag queens or anything else, it is perfectly okay to be that. By making queerness visible and in your face, It made gender nonconformity and queerness a possibility for people of all ages. It made it legible, whereas before it was almost impossible to imagine a good life lived as a queer person. Her message was that no one should feel shut up and shut in. Of course, not everyone sees it Doris's way. Tennessee, Florida, Montana, Texas, West Virginia, Missouri, Nebraska, South Dakota, Arkansas, Idaho, Oklahoma, and Utah have considered or enacted legislation against drag performance, especially around minors. Accompanying the laws that outlaw drag, there have been vigilante threats against drag performers. Outside of drag queen story hours, the Proud Boys and other groups have shown up carrying weapons, and there is always a chance that those groups could get information about one of the performers and dox them or show up at their home and threaten them. It is a scary time for drag queens. It's a scary time for all queer people. But you just don't silence a drag queen. Drag queens continued to show up, and eventually drag queens became staples and even unofficial representatives of the queer community. Why? Because they're funny and entertaining as hell. That's why. Drag is an art that brings together fashion, camp, character acting, stand-up comedy, singing, dance, choreography, cultural commentary, satire, and a sharp critique of gender roles, all performed in 6-inch heels. And despite its naysayers, it has gained significant cultural notoriety. RuPaul's Drag Race has reached staggering viewership numbers, and the reason is because drag is hilarious and fun and strange and entertaining. Now, if you haven't yet watched an episode of RuPaul's Drag Race, then your minister is giving you homework. And be sure to tell people that your minister gave you this homework to watch RuPaul's Drag Race. The other thing I want to say about the history of drag, another thing that makes it especially poignant, is that it came to flourish in the middle of the AIDS crisis. In many ways, the queens became the heroes of that moment in LGBTQ history. They would go in and spend time with the young men whose families abandoned and ignored them. They would walk into the hospital room when none of the hospital staff would walk in there. And they would do it with the hilarity and coyness and sharp wit that we have come to associate with the queens. They would bring their defiant, joyful levity into the valley of the shadow. These are the reasons I view it as a cultural art form that celebrates life with complete, exuberant absurdity in the face of oppression and even death. It's Purim, a minor holiday in the Jewish tradition that commemorates the story recounted in the book of Esther. Now, when I opened the book this year, I was struck by the ways that the characters all make different choices about how to appear before the king. The first queen, Vashti, refuses to appear. And there are a lot of theories about why. We don't exactly know why she refused to appear. But what we do know from the story is that the king was capricious. Those who came before him were as likely to meet their end as they were to find favor. And so Vashti made a calculation that by refusing to show up, she would be safe. She was wrong. She was either killed or exiled. Then there were others in the story who conspire in secret against the king. They are discovered and hung from a high gallows. And then there's Haman. He conspires with the king with nefarious intent, thinking that he can play a power game and therefore come out on top. Specifically, he calls for the extermination of the Jewish population because he thinks it will boost his position in the royal court. He is wrong. It backfires and he's executed. And yay. And then we have Esther. And she realizes that she can take the road that Vashti did and try to hide or ignore the violence that is being done to her community. Or she can use her influence on behalf of the Jewish community. And the conversation that she has with her cousin Mordecai about this decision, in which she's really wrestling with this, she's wrestling with her fear and whether or not she should be courageous and stand up and come out about who she is before the king. That conversation with Mordecai is one of the most poignant in the story. Mordecai says to her, "Who knows if you have come to the kingdom for just such a time as this? Who knows if you have come just for a time such as this?" I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that drag is made for just such a time as this. And that's because drag refuses to disappear or go back into hiding even in the face of threats. It refuses to be covert about its demands. It refuses respectability and assimilation in favor of defiant, joyful expression. And it does all of this in the face of danger and bigotry and people who want to see you dead. And the thing is, this scares the hell out of fascists. Fascism needs you to be angry or despairing or dispirited or hopeless. When you choose to be your defiant, joyful self, especially your defiant, joyful queer self, if that applies, then you undercut fascism. I'm reminded here of a quote from Heather Cox Richardson. She says, "Showing up and doing the things that bring you joy says to an authoritarian, you have no place to root here. You have no place to root here." Drag queens know all about that, and I think we should too. Now, I bet there's still a few of you who aren't exactly sold on this connection between drag and Purim, and that's fair. So I'll just offer this one final thought. In the festival of Purim, people are expected to dress in costume, they wear face paint, they celebrate with joy and festivity, and they're encouraged to be especially loud. Sound familiar? It sounds a little drag adjacent to me. And there's no real consensus about why this is. There's no real consensus about why Purim is celebrated in this way with costumes and masks and this sort of joyful festivity. I'm going to give it my own spin. When we express ourselves with joy and we're loud about that joy, when we're loud about our joy in the face of death and despair and hopelessness, then the power that wants to dispirit us or annihilate us or shut us up or make us quietly disappear, that power cannot take root. That power that seems so forceful, so clearly on the ascendancy, so clearly able to take hold of every person and transform them into accommodating and hopeless subjects, that power can't take root. Your joy means that fascism cannot take root. My spiritual companions, your joy was made for just a time such as this. Amen.